So I tested all the flying mounts in Palworld to see which one of them is truly the fastest, and the results were actually quite shocking. Thanks to the power of data mining, we can finally see each individual pal's running speed, but I found that doesn't paint the whole picture. There are quite a few other factors to take into account too, including the general stamina and unlocked skills. So we're actually going to go over some of the things that I learned through this and maybe help you out to make a better choice moving forward. So for the test to be as accurate as possible, there are two things that I've done. One of them is that I completely avoided any bonus speed passives on all of these spells. Basically, I just tried to go ahead and test out how they move at their default speeds, because let's be honest, it's going to take a long while and a lot of breeding until you get both swift, runner, and nimble on the same dragon slash creature. So it's going to take a long time before that happens. The only exception, or a couple of exceptions, are the legendary pals. This includes Stallion and Jet Dragon, which already come with the legend stat, and this already gives them a bonus in speed. And the reason I included that is because they are going to be compared in a category of their own, plus this is a stat that you get them with by default anyway, so you will have to factor those in too. Now the second is that I built this specialized track after seeing a Reddit video that did something similar. So this is actually a really good idea because it just minimizes any sort of interference and gives us a very good way to measure both the distance and the speed that we take with each individual pal. So yeah, I did find some of the starting islands very good, and I just built one of these tracks to help out with that. So now that everything is prepped, it's time for the tests, and as I've said, I've done 4 batches in total, 2 for running, including no sprint and with sprint, and then 2 for flying, again both with and without sprinting. So let's get started with the first batch, which I call the low level, including Nightwing, Vanworm, Hellzephyr, and Beacon. All you can get before level 30, I believe. But essentially, in terms of running without any sprinting, obviously the Beacon was by far the best, by a significant margin actually, with the Vanworm and the Hellzephyr actually being quite close, and for good reason. They are actually found within the same area, one during the day, one during the night. Nightwing, as it's obvious, came dead last. In fact, Nightwing and Vanworm consistently came out dead last in literally every single testing that I've done. Now for the high level variants, we have Quivern, Suzaku, Shadowbeak, and Ragnarok, and the biggest surprise here for the run no sprint was that Quivern actually got a pretty respectable run. It's, well, not dead last, but second last, but still much better than the previous batch at 35.22 seconds. But obviously the winner here was Suzaku, not too far off from Shadowbeak, followed by Ragnarok, and finally the Quivern. Now there's also the special case of the legendary dragons, but I made a test with a regular Phalaris. So Jet Dragon and Stallion are 2 legendary dragons that you can actually get around level 50. Once you hit level 50, you can start hunting for them. But they also come with the legendary perk, which gives them additional speed, on top of the fact that naturally they have some of the highest run and sprint. So Jet Dragon has the highest in the game at 1700 for the run and 3300 for the sprint, which is like double compared to everything else you get, and then some. So that's why he consistently came on top in every single scenario. But until you get these legendaries, you obviously have to get the others before it. Phalaris is not a legendary bird, however it does keep track quite well with these other 2, obviously at least with Stallion, but it's going to be your best option before you move to the legendary stuff, and you can easily grab a few of these up north on one of those secret Pal Islands. It actually spawns there quite often. Now the next batch is going to be all about running with sprinting, and again Nightwing and Vanworm from the low level batch consistently coming out last. Quivern was a surprise here because it only took 27 seconds, so it's much better compared to the 2, at least in terms of running while sprinting. I did not expect that. And as you will see in just a bit, it's actually better at flying compared to Nightwing and Vanworm. So given how it's a level 23 boss you can get, you might want to jump straight to it compared to the Vanworm. Hellzephyr, of course, was the better of the bunch, at least in this case, yet again, so maybe that's also a better option to the Vanworm. The next one is the high level badge, and in this case we again tested with the sprint. Now this doesn't completely show the power of the stamina just yet, but yeah, in this case Suzaku is going to be one that we're going to focus on in just a bit. In the meantime, Ragnarok won this sprint this time around. It's a very fast bird but with a very low level of stamina. Then yeah, it was the Shadow Beak, which is a high level creature, followed by Beacon, and finally Suzaku. Suzaku is actually really slow if you just move on the ground level. Obviously, it goes without saying that testing this on the high level stuff, you're going to see much more improved times. Like the Jet Dragon is absolutely crazy at 8 seconds to complete just that. But Falaris was quite a surprise too, 20 seconds, so still far ahead compared to all the other options in the normal category. Even like a little bit closer to Frostallion, but Frostallion really starts kicking things off from this point on, and once you start also applying it to flying, it's going to completely get ahead. But you're gonna see that in just a bit. So this brings us to actual flying. So the first one is flying without any sprinting, just pressing the arrow up button while these creatures are up in the air. So one of the things you're going to notice right away is that Beacon yet again gets ahead when no sprinting is involved. Then Helzaphyr and Van Worm are very close to one another because technically speaking their run speed is pretty much the same with very minimal differences. So I believe it's about 700 for both of them, which is why you're seeing them that way. And finally, again, Nightwing coming dead last, not really a great bird. For the second batch, we saw some interesting things, but actually full-on correlating with the internal game files. So in terms of Suzaku and Shadowbeak, you can see that both of them almost tied in. So this is within the margin of error, and for good reason, is because both of their run speed is 850. They will always reach the destination within the same time limit. Maybe Suzaku might win a bit because of the better stamina, but at least on this track they came in very close. And the same was with Quivern and Ragnarok. It's because both of them have the same 800 in this case run speed, so they both achieved the same result right here. It was like pretty much the most dead on result I was able to get. Of course, on the case of the dragons versus Falaris, we can see that these are far ahead of everything else, with Falaris being the dead last, but still quite far ahead compared to the previous two batches. Frostallion is not too far off either, but Jet Dragon just blasts everything away, and it does make sense. It's literally the last endgame boss you get when it comes to at least flying mounts. And this finally brings us to the last one, and that's going to be the flying plus sprinting. And here is where that stamina does start to make a little bit of a difference. And if you compare this to even longer tracks, like going over a full map, you're going to see much bigger than this. So essentially on the first batch, you're not going to see, well, you're actually going to see some big differences in this case, but Nightwing and Van Worm again are far behind, and that's also because they consistently drop out of stamina. So around the middle of the track, they basically have to wait for that stamina to replenish and then jump back up. In this case, what I did is that I just kept pressing shift, and as soon as the bar was available, I immediately jumped once in the air with all of these and then resumed the flight mode. That's because I wanted to take all of this into account as you would normally when flying. But in this case, it seems that Quivern and Helzaphyr actually dropped quite a lot, so they are now much slower in terms of these longer tracks when it comes to using their speed. However, still surprised that Quivern and Helzaphyr are so close to one another and quite so far ahead to the Van Worm. You wouldn't think that was the case, at least when playing. The second batch was also pretty interesting, so another shift right here. We have Beacon and Ragnarok. They had the smallest amount of stamina in this case, so by the middle of the track, both of them almost at the same time, I had to then jump back up in the air once my stamina bar got fully filled. But Suzaku especially kept going and had by far the highest amount of stamina compared to all other mounts I've tested. So in theory, if we were to extrapolate and just make a much longer track, or just say for example you traverse from one end of the game or the map to another, Suzaku would probably win since he has by far the highest flight time. But he was actually pretty close over there with Ragnarok and Shadowbeak, actually just like a second or so. But obviously in this case Ragnarok won at least the speed test. He is a very speedy creature because of its smaller size, followed by Shadowbeak, another end game Pal, plus then Suzaku. But again, Suzaku never had to drop from the sky. He continued at all times. Even Shadowbeak dropped there right at the end. Beacon, on the other hand, just came in dead last, and yeah, that's because his stamina plus the fact that he's slower than Ragnarok means that he just wasn't as good as the others. Obviously, for the legendary dragons and Falaris, it's not like they aren't far ahead of everything else. Pretty much Jet Dragon at 7 seconds and 30, followed by Frostalion, and then 20 seconds for Falaris is not too bad. Plus, just as it hit the finish mark, it dropped out of its stamina, so by this point it would have needed to recuperate. But this kinda teaches us a few things. First of all, it teaches us that before the legendary dragons, Falaris is probably your best option when it comes to having a balanced creature that is fast out of the gate but doesn't suffer too much from stamina, compared to Ragnarok or even Beacon, who probably are going to be a lot more annoying given how they tend to fall from the sky a lot longer. This is why you may want to compensate by using a Suzaku before you get Falaris, as it does come a bit later, if you purely want to just stay in the air for as long as possible, and you're not losing that much on speed with Suzaku. So all in all, the first couple of spots obviously go to the Jet Dragon and Frostalion. So Jet Dragon is by far the fastest on both the run 1700 and on the sprint 3300. In fact, his run is faster than most of the sprints in the game. Frostalion also like far off, but still very good, 1000 on the run and 1500 on the sprint, which is interesting because Falaris, according to the in-game stats, is not too far off, only 100 difference on the sprint. So Falaris at number 3 just because he's actually very balanced and a good option between Suzaku and something like a Beacon or a Ragnarok. He does have the good speed, but he doesn't suffer from low stamina. Now on the 4th spot is between Shadowbeak and Suzaku, and the reason for that is because Suzaku comes in very early, relatively speaking. You can get it after around like 40, 45, so before Shadowbeak technically. Plus, he is not too far off on the sprint, and he has by far the best stamina in the game, so he will keep you in the air much longer. If we were to compare this on the whole map and do the same results again, probably Suzaku would win on a couple more categories compared to the rest. And from that point on, it's of course Ragnarok. Yes, low on the stamina but good on the sprint, and the run is not too bad. Then we have Beacon, Helzafir, and Quivern on the 7th, 8th, and 9th spot, just because we're focusing on the flight speed. Even though Quivern is a bit faster than them on the running, we still need it for flying, so that's why Helzafir is a little bit better here. And then on the 10th spot we have the Venomworm. It's not a bad early on option, but I also included the Nightwing just because it's so early, so quite a bit behind that too. Other variants were on the Nightwing level, so they would have still been on like the 10th, 11th, 12th spot or so, so that's why I did not include them. And that is pretty much it with the video. Let me know down below in the comments which one of these is your main right now in terms of flying. Personally, for me, it's Suzaku, even though I do love the Jet Dragon, but I mean, I do love staying up in the air for a lot longer. And of course, I'm going to follow up soon with a ton of other stuff, including how to get the maximized possible speed out of these, and maybe we shall do some testing out of this too. This is it. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time,